Hello students, welcome to the PD Life Science Academy for the Happy Learning. NEET एक्झामचे प्रिपरेशन जे विद्यार्थी करत आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी बेसिक कन्सेप्ट लर्निंग आणि लिंकिंग ऑफ कन्सेप्ट हे जेवढे गरजेचे आहे तेवढेच NCERT बुकमधील चॅप्टरचे कंटेंट रीड करणे आवश्यक आहे. हे करत असताना फक्त एक रीडिंग करून चालणार नाही, मल्टिपल टाइम्स रिव्हिजन होणे गरजेचे आहे. यात टाळाटाळ करणे चांगले नव्हे. आपण सेट केलेले टार्गेट अचीव करण्यासाठी PD लाईफ सायन्स अकॅडमीने सर्व स्टुडंटसाठी जे नीट एक्झामचे प्रिपरेशन करीत आहेत त्यांच्यासाठी 21 डे रीडिंग चॅलेंजची सुरुवात केली आहे. रोज एका चॅप्टरचे रीडिंग आपण कंप्लीट करणार आहोत. हे चॅलेंज ज्या विद्यार्थ्यांनी ॲक्सेप्ट केले आहे त्यांनी त्यांचे डेली टार्गेट अचीव केल्यावर कॉमेंट करून सांगायचे आहे. सो लेट्स गेट रेडी फॉर टेकिंग रीडिंग चॅलेंज. ऑल द व्हेरी बेस्ट. थँक यू. 21 डे बायोलॉजी रीडिंग चॅलेंज, डे 20 रीडिंग चॅलेंज, चॅप्टर नंबर 20 फ्रॉम NCERT बायोलॉजी टेक्स्टबुक ऑफ 11th standard. Name of chapter is a locomotion and the movement. Movement is one of the significant feature of the living being. Animals and the plant exhibit a wide range of the movement. The streaming of the protoplasm is the unicellular organism like the amoeba is the simple form of the movement. The movement of the cilia, flagella, tentacles are shown by the many organisms. The human being can move limbs, jaws, eyelids, tongue, etc. Some of the movement result in the change in the place or a location. Such a voluntary movement are called as a locomotion. The walking, running, climbing, flying, swimming are all some forms of the locomotory movements. The locomotory structure need not too different from those affecting other types of the movement. For example, in paramecium, the cilia helps in the movement of the food through the cytopharynx and in locomotion as well as. The hydra can use the tentacle for the capturing its prey and also use them for the locomotion. We use the limb for the change in the body posture and the locomotion as well. The above observation suggests that the movement and the locomotion cannot be studied separately. The two may be linked by the stating that all locomotions that movement but all movement are not locomotions. The method for the locomotion performed by animal vary with their habitat and the demand of the situation. However, the locomotion is generally for the search of the food, shelter, mate, suitable breeding ground, favorable climatic condition, or to escape from the enemies or the predators. Now the 20.1 is a type of the movement. Cell of the human body exhibit the three main types of the movement, namely the amoeboid, ciliary, and the muscular. The some specialized cell is one body in our body like the macrophages and the leukocytes in a blood exhibit the amoeboid movement. It is affected by the pseudopodia formed by the streaming of the protoplasm as in the amoeba. The cytoskeletal element like the microfilaments are also involved in the amoeboid movement. Ciliary movement occurs in most of our internal tubular organs which are lined by the ciliated epithelium. The coordinated movement of the cilia in the trachea help us in removing the dust particle and some of the foreign substances inhaled along with the atmospheric air. The passage of the ova through the female reproductive tract is also facilitated by the ciliary movement. The movement of our limbs, jaws, tongue, etc. requires the muscular movement. The contractile properties of the muscles are effectively used for the locomotion. The other movements by the human being and the majority of the multicellular organism, the locomotion requires the perfect coordination activities of the muscular, skeletal and the neural system. In this chapter, you will learn about the types of the muscles, their structures, mechanism of the contraction and the important aspects of the skeletal system. The 20.2 is a muscle. You have studied in the chapter 8 that the cilia and the flagella are the outgrowths of the cell membrane. The flagellar movement help in the swimming of the spermatozoa, maintenance of the water current in a canal system of the sponges, and in the locomotion of the protozoan like the euglena. The muscles is the specialized tissue of the mesodermal origin. About the 40 to 50% of the body weight of the human adult is contributed in the muscles. They have the specialized property like the excitability, contractibility, extensibility and the elasticity. The muscles have been classified as using the different criteria, namely the location, appearance and the nature of the regulation of their activities. Based on their location, three types of the muscles are identified: skeletal, visceral and the cardiac. The skeletal muscle are closely associated with the skeletal component of the body, and they have the striped appearance under the microscope and hence are called as a striated muscles. As their activity are under the voluntary control of the nervous system, they are known as the voluntary muscles too. They are the primarily involved in the locomotory action and the change of the body posture. The visceral muscles are located in the inner wall of the hollow visceral organs of the body like the alimentary canal, reproductive tract, etc. do not exhibit any situation or any striated and are the smooth appearance. Hence, they are called as a smooth muscle or non-striated muscles. Their activity are not under the voluntary control of the nervous system and are therefore known as involuntary muscles, and they assist, for example, in the transport of the food through the digestive tract and the gamete through the genital tract. As the name suggested, the cardiac muscle is the muscle of the heart. Many cardiac muscles cells assemble in the branching pattern to form the cardiac muscle. Based on the appearance, the cardiac muscle are striated and they are involuntary in the nature as the nervous system does not control their activities directly. Let us examine a skeletal muscle in a detail to understand the structure and the mechanism of the contraction. Each organized skeletal muscle in our body is made of the number of the muscle bundle or the fascicles held together by the common collagenous connective tissue layer called as a fascia. Each muscle bundle contains the number of muscle fibers, and each muscle fiber is lined by the plasma membrane called as a sarcolemma, the enclosing the sarcoplasm. The muscle fiber is the syncytium, as the sarcoplasm contains the many nuclei. The endoplasmic reticulum, that is the sarcoplasmic reticulum of the muscle fiber, is the storehouse of the calcium ion. A characteristic feature of the muscle fiber is the presence of the large number of the parallelly arranged filament in the sarcoplasm and called as a myofilament or a myofibrils. Each myofibril has an alternate dark and a light bands on it. The detailed study of the myofibril has established that is a striated appearance is due to the distribution pattern of the two important proteins, that is the actin and the myosin. The light band contains the actin and is called as a I band or a isotropic band, whereas the dark band called as a or anisotropic band contains the myosin. Both the proteins are arranged as a rod-like structure parallel to each other and also to the longitudinal axis of the myofibril. The actin filament are the thinner as compared to the myosin filament, hence are commonly called the thin and the thick filament respectively. In center of the each I band is an elastic fiber called as a Z line which bisects it. The thin filament are the firmly attached to the Z line. The thick filament in the A band are also held together in the middle of the band by a thin fibrous membrane called as a M-line. The A and the I band are arranged alternately throughout the length of the myofibrils. The portion of the myofibril between the two successive Z lines is considered as the functional unit of the contraction and is called as a sarcomere. In resting state, the thin element on the either side of the thick filament partially overlap the free ends of the thick filament, leaving the central parts of the thick filament. This central part of the thick filament not overlap by the thin filament is called as a XZ or H zone. 20.2.1 is a structure of the contractile proteins. The each actin or a thin filament is made up of the two F, that is the filamentous action helically wound to each other. Each F actin is a polymer of the monomeric G, that is the globular action, two filaments of the another protein, the tropomyosin, also run close to the F actin throughout this length. A complex protein, that is the troponin, is distributed to the regular interval on the tropomyosin. In the resting state, a subunit of the troponin masks the activity binding site for the myosin on the actin filament. Each myosin or a thick filament is also a polymerized protein. Many monomeric protein called meromyosin constitute a one thick filament. Each meromyosin has the two important parts, a globular head with a short arm and a tail, the form being called as a heavy meromyosin, that is the HMM, and the latter is a light meromyosin, that is the LMM. The HMM contains a component, that is the head and the short arm project outward, that regulate the distance and the angle from each other from the surface of the polymerized myosin filament and is known as a cross arm. The globular head is the active ATPase enzyme and has a binding site for the ATP and active site for the actin. Now the 20.2.2 is a mechanism of the muscle contraction. Mechanism of the muscle contraction is best explained by the sliding filament theory, that which state that the contraction of the muscle take place by the sliding of the thin filament over a thick filament. The muscle contraction is initiated by the signal sent by the central nervous system, that is the CNS, via a motor neuron. A motor neuron along the muscle fiber connected to it constitute a motor unit. The junction between the motor neuron and the sarcolemma of the muscle fiber is called as a neuromuscular junction or a motor end plate. A neural signal reaching this junction release a neurotransmitter, that is the acetyl-CoA, which generate an action potential to and the sarcolemma. This spread through the muscle fiber and causes the release of the calcium ion into the sarcoplasm. Increase in the calcium level leads to the binding of the calcium with a subunit of the troponin on the actin filament and thereby remove the masking of the active sites for the myosin. Utilizing the energy from the ATP hydrolysis and the myosin head now binding to the expose the active site on the actin to form a cross bridge, and this pulls the attached actin filament towards the center of A band. The Z line attached to this actin has also pulled inwards, thereby causing a shortening of the sarcomere, that is the contraction. It is clear from the above step that during the shortening of the muscle, that is the contraction, that the I band get reduces, whereas the A band retain the length. The myosin releasing the ADP and the inorganic P1 goes back to its relaxed state. A new ATP binding to the cross bridge is broken. The ATP is again hydrolyzed by the myosin head and the cycle of the cross bridge formation. The breakage of the repeated causing further sliding. The process continues till the calcium ion is pumped back to the sarcoplasmic cisternae, resulting in the masking of the actin filament. The cause of the return of the Z line back to their original position, that is the relaxation. The action time of the fiber can vary in the different muscle. Repeated activation of the muscle can lead to the accumulation of the lactic acid due to the anaerobic breakdown of the glycogen. In them causing the fatigue, the muscle contain a red color oxygen shortening pigment called as a myoglobin. Myoglobin is high in some of the muscle, which gives the reddish appearance, and such muscles are called as a red fibers. Each muscle also contain the plenty of the mitochondria, which can utilize the large amount of the oxygen stored in them for the ATP production. These muscle therefore can also be called as a aerobic muscle. On the other hand, the some of the muscle possess very less quantity of the myoglobin, and therefore they appear a pale or a whitish. These are the white fibers, and the number of the mitochondria are also few in them, but amount of the sarcoplasmic reticulum is high. They depend on the aerobic process for energy. Now the 20.3 is the skeletal system. The skeletal system consists of the framework of the bones and the few cartilages, and this system has a significant role in the movement shown by the body. Imagine the chewing and the food without the jaw bones and the walking around without the limb bones. The bone and the cartilage are the specialized connective tissues. The form have a very hard matrix due to the calcium salt in it, and latter has a slightly pliable matrix due to the chondroitin salt. In a human being, this system is made up of the 206 bones and few cartilages, and it groups into the two principal divisions, the axial and the appendicular skeleton. Axial skeleton comprises the 80 bones distributed along the main axis of the body. The skull, the vertebral column, sternum and the rib constitute the axial skeleton. The skull is composed of the two sets of the bones, the cranial and the facial, and towards the 22 that the total of the 22 bones. The cranial bones are the 8 in number, and they form the hard protective outer covering. Cranium is for the brain. The facial region made up of the 40 skeletal element, which forms the front part of the skull. A single U-shaped bone called as a hyoid is present at the base of the buccal cavity, and it is also includes the skull. Each middle ear contains the 3 bony tiny bones that is the malleus, incus and the stapes, collectively called as the ear ossicles. The skull region articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column with the help of the two occipital condyles or dicondylic skull. Our vertebral column is formed by the 26 serial arranged units called as a vertebra, and is dorsally placed. It extend from the base of the skull and constitute the main framework of the trunk. Each vertebra has the central hollow portion or a neural canal through which the spinal cord passes. The first vertebra is the atlas, and it articulates with the occipital condyle. The vertebral column is differentiated into the cervical, that is the 7, thoracic, that is the 12, and lumbar it is the 5, and the sacral is a 1 fuse, and the coccygeal is a 1 fuse region starting from the skull. The number of the cervical vertebrae are the 7 in almost all the mammals, including the human being. The vertebral column protects the spinal cord, support the head, and serve as a point of attachment for the rib and the musculature of the back. The sternum is a flat bone on the ventral middle line of the thorax. There are the 12 pairs of the rib. Each rib is a thin flat bone connected dorsally to the vertebral column and ventrally to the sternum. It has the true circulation surface on its dorsal end, and is hence called as a bicephalic. The first 7 pair of the rib are called as a true ribs. Dorsally they are attached to the thoracic vertebrae, and ventrally connected to the sternum with the help of the hyaline cartilage. The 8th, 9th and the 10th pair of the rib do not articulate the direct with the sternum but join the seventh rib with the help of the hyaline cartilage. These are called as a vertebrochondral or the false rib. The last two pairs, the 11th and the 12th of the rib, are not connected ventrally and are therefore called as floating ribs. The thoracic vertebrae and the rib or a sternum together form a rib cage. The bone of the limbs along with their girdle constitute a appendicular skeleton. Each limb is made up of the 30 bones. The bone of the hand, that is the forelimb, and the humerus, radius, and the ulna. The carpals, that is the wrist bone, 8 in the number. Metacarpals, that is the palm bones, the 5 in number, and the phalanges, that is the digits, the 14 in number. The femur, the thigh bone, the largest or a longest bone, the tibia and the fibula. Then the tarsals, that is the ankle bone, 7 in number. Metatarsals is the 5 in number, and the phalanges is a digit, 14 in number. And the bones of the legs are the hind limbs. A cup-shaped bone called as a patella covered the knee ventrally, that is the knee cap. The pectoral and the pelvic girdle bones help in the articulation of the upper and the lower limbs respectively with the axial skeleton. Each girdle is the form of the two hulls, and each hulls of the pectoral girdle consists of the clavicle and the scapula. The scapula is a large triangular flat bone situated in the dorsal part of the thorax between the second and the seventh rib. The dorsal flat triangular body of the scapula has the slightly elevated ridge called the spine, which project as a flat expanded process called as acromion. The clavicle articulates with these below the acromion is the depression called as a glenoids cavity, which articulate the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. Each clavicle is the long slender bone with the two curvature, and this bone is commonly called as a collarbone. The pelvic girdle consists of the two coxal bones. Each coxal bone is formed by the fusion of the three bones, that is the ilium, ischium, and the pubis. At the point of the fusion of the above bones is a cavity is called as a acetabulum, to which the tight bone articulates. The two hulls of the pelvic girdle meets ventrally to form the pubic symphysis containing the fibrous cartilage. The 20.4 is the joints. Joints are essential for all types of the movement involving the bony parts of the body. Locomotory movements are no exceptions to this. The joints are the points of the contact between the bones or between the bones and the cartilage. The force generated by the muscles is used to carry out the movement through the joints, where the joints act as a fulcrum. The movability at this joint vary depending on the different factors. The joints have been classified into the three major structural forms, namely the fibrous, cartilaginous, and the synovials. Then the fibrous joints do not allow any movement. This type of the joint is shown by the flat skull bones, which fuse end to end with the help of the dense fibrous connective tissue in the form of the sutures to form a cranium. In the cartilaginous joint, the bones involved in the joints together with the help of the cartilage. The joint between the adjacent vertebrae in the vertebral column is of this the pattern, and it permits the limited movement. The synovial joint are characterized by the presence of the fluid filled with the synovial cavity between the articulating surface of the two bones. Such an arrangement allows the considerable movement, and this joint help in the locomotion and many other movement. Ball and the socket joint between the humerus and the pectoral girdles, the hinge joint and the knee joint, the pivotal joint between the atlas and the axis, the gliding joints between the carpals, and the saddle joints between the carpus and the metacarpus of the thumbs are some examples. 20.5 is the disorder of the muscular and the skeletal system, is the myasthenia gravis, the autoimmune disorders affecting the neuromuscular junction leading to the fatigue, weakening and the paralysis of the skeletal muscle. Then the muscular dystrophy, the progressive degeneration of the skeletal muscle mostly due to the generic order tetany, the rapid spasms, that is the wild contraction in the muscle due to the low calcium in the body fluid, arthritis, the inflammation of the joints, osteoporosis, age-related disorders characterized by the decrease the bone mass and increase the chance of the fracture and decrease the level of the estrogen is a common causes. The gout, inflammation of the joints due to the accumulation of the uric acid crystals. Now the summary of the locomotion and the movement. The movement is an essential feature of all living beings. The protoplasmic streaming, the ciliary movement, movement of the fins, limbs, wings, etc. are the some forms exhibited by the animals. A voluntary movement which causes the animal to change its place is called as a locomotion. Animal moves generally in a search of the food, shelter, mate, breeding ground, better climate and or to protect themselves. The cell of the human body exhibit the amoeboid, ciliary and muscular movement. Locomotion and the many other movement requires the coordinated muscular activities. Three types of the muscles are present in our body. Skeletal muscle are attached to the skeletal element. They appear the striated and are the voluntary in the nature. Visceral muscle present in the inner wall of the visceral organ are the non-striated and the involuntary. Cardiac muscle are the muscle of the heart and they are the striated branch, and the involuntary muscles possesses the excitability, contractibility and the extensibility and the elasticity. Muscle fiber is the anatomical unit of the muscle. Each muscle fiber has a many parallelly arranged microfibrils, and each microfibril contain the many serial arranged unit called as a sarcomere, which are the functional unit. Each sarcomere has a central A band made up of the thick myosin filament and the two half I bands and made up of the thin actin filament on either side of it, marks as a Z line. The actin and the myosin are the polymerized protein and with the contractility. The active site for the myosin on resting actin filament are the masked by the protein troponin. Myosin head contains the ATPase and has the ATP binding site and active site for the actin. The motor neuron carried a signal to the muscle fibers which generate an action potential in it. This causes the release of the calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, that is the calcium activate the actin which binds to the myosin head and form a cross bridge. This cross bridge pulls the actin filament, causing them to the slide over the myosin filament and thereby causing the contraction. The calcium are then returned to the sarcoplasmic reticulum which inactive the actin and cross bridge are broken and the muscle get relaxed. Repeated stimulation of the muscle leads to the fatigue, and muscles are the classified as a red and the white fiber based primarily on the amount of the red color myoglobin pigment in them. The bones and the cartilage constitute our skeletal system. The skeletal system is divisible into the axial and the appendicular. The skull, vertebral column, ribs and the sternum constitute a axial skeleton. Limb bones and the girdle form the appendicular skeleton, and the three types of the joints are formed between the bones or between the bone and the cartilage, that is the fibrous, cartilaginous and the synovial. The synovial joints allows the considerable movement and therefore play a significant role in the locomotion. Thank you so much.